Hey guys, in this video we're going to take a look at how we can pump a little new life into the Bose Rave radio that you've got hanging around, or maybe you find it on eBay or someplace like that. This is a great platform because it still sounds really good. We're going to use an Arylic and a few other devices. Hey, if you like this music, a big shout out to Sam Light on Epidemic Sound. I'll put a link in the description for you. Let's jump right into this. So what are you going to need to make this work? You're going to need, of course, the old Bose radio. This is a first gen model, so some of the other gens might look a little bit different on the inside. Just kind of take it for what it is. You're also going to need a 5-volt power supply right here. So I decided to use this old Apple power supply I had hanging around. I've got a whole bunch of them hanging around. And then we've got the Arylic Wi-Fi board that you can then leverage. I'll put the information in the notes so you can order these online. All right, so let's start with the power supply. First thing you got to do is dig that prong out of the base of the power supply. It's glued in just a little bit, but not too bad to get out. You see how I had to kind of mess up the case. Doesn't matter, you're not going to use the case. One thing I do want to point out is that you've got your power coming in here, 120 volts, or whatever your power happens to be. And then on the inside of the case, the connectors are right here, right? So take care when you're pulling this apart. You're going to separate those little wires inside the case from the prongs, and that's how you're going to get power to the power supply. All right, right up here you can see the two wires going into the power supply. You can see it's a super compact design. It's really kind of nice because you've got your 120 volt power coming in on one side, and then you've still got the 5-volt connector that you'll leverage on the other side. So it makes it real easy to use this little power supply. All right, so the first thing you want to do is test fit these devices in the case. Now again, this is a first gen device. It's got the big transformer here. I don't know that they all have those. I'm assuming most of them do. And then you've got down on the bottom side, you've got a big heat sink that you've got to get past and all that fun stuff. So anyways, I put the little Arylic board tucked in right here against the base cavity, I guess is what you might want to call it. And then I put the power supply in right over here. You can see here that I was able to go ahead and fasten that in. It fits in pretty nice and snug. All right, so the next thing you want to do is really test your power supply before you go much farther. You can see here, this is the bottom of the Arylic board. You've got your 5-volt input, and then all your other connections are listed on the back of the board here. You get a little bit of information on how those are all connected when you order the device. So anyways, here's what's left of the power supplies for testing purposes. I used the front panel that came out of the power supply to get juice into the power supply. You can see here you're using little clip leads to get that power there. If you're not comfortable with working with 120 volts, this might be something that you pass on. If you're comfortable with working with it, then you should be fine. Just be careful. Right, so here's the 5-volt output from the power supply itself. I'm just using a cable here that connects into the old USB port. So you can see here, these are the 120 volt leads. I've soldered into place, and then I hot glued these puppies down. When you do this, you definitely want to use some heat shrink tubing to fully insulate those connections. But the reason I did some gluing was to keep those leads from being stressed by just handling the power supply. It's pretty small and it's easy to move it around. What you're going to want to do is route your cables. You can see here I use the 5-volt connector on the power supply. This is my 120 volts right here that I haven't connected to the primary board yet. I just routed this cable right here. These are your audio cables outputting from the Arylic device. And I'll show you where those connect on the Bose radio. All right, so go ahead and solder your cables in. We'll start with the 120 volt connection. Basically, I pulled the board up off the plastic base and found a good place to solder those AC connections in. And that's where I did it, on the bottom. So I routed that cable carefully so that it's not pinched or anything when it's all put together. The secondary portion to this is taking those audio output cables from the Arylic device and just soldering them onto the auxiliary on the Bose radio. So it just makes it super easy to connect that right into the auxiliary port. I didn't have any problems with hum or any kind of weird noise. The Arylic has an audio output that's variable, so you can actually do it, adjust your volume through the Arylic application and leave your Bose wave radio at the same volume whenever it's on. All right, so the next thing you do is test fit everything. You can see the power supply up here, 5-volt connections, and this the top of the chassis from the back kind of swung down so that the power supply was kind of in this area, right tucked in there between the heat sink and the power connector. And then the Arylic board actually fit into, I think it was kind of into this area where the base cavity is. Here's another picture of it. You can see your audio cables going down to the connectors down here on the rear of the Bose. Here's your heat sinks in the Bose, transformer, and of course you have to reconnect everything that you've disconnected to get that top piece out and away. But now you can also see the AC lines for the little power supply that I used right there. So that gives you an idea of how you have to fit that together to make everything work. So at this point, you want to sit it down and on the bench and just test it for a while. I tested to make sure it didn't have any heat problems or anything like that, and I found it to be very stable. I've used this in place for days on end, and it's never had any heat problems or anything else. It sounds great. The Bose really has a good sound to it, so I think you'll like it. Have fun.